While most people gave up on the Spider-Man games after Spider-Man 3, I always make sure to keep an eye on them. Each game has their flaws, but I've enjoyed the recent Spider-Man games, excluding Spider-Man 3 of course. People seem to remember Spider-Man 2 being awesome, and I think it has made people overly harsh on any Spider-Man game that has been released since. This attitude meant that when Beenox came to make the latest Spider-Man game, they made sure that everyone knew that they were taking inspiration from Spider-Man 2. The Amazing Spider-Man was the first open world game Beenox made, and I liked it. It was overly simplistic, but fun nonetheless. So here we are for the sequel, The Amazing Spider-Man 2. I put off playing this game at launch as I wanted to see the film first, and the reviews have been less than kind. I did finally get myself a copy and have played through the game itself though. So, did The Amazing Spider-Man 2 manage to recapture the magic of Spider-Man 2 that people have wanted for years, or will it shortly be forgotten as a missed opportunity? Let's have a look. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is loosely based off the recent film. It starts with Peter Parker / Spider-Man trying to find the man who killed Uncle Ben, but this quickly turns into him getting involved in a crime war involving the Russians and having to fight a lot of familiar faces. Electro and Harry Osborn are present from the film, but the game also features Kingpin, Black Cat and Kraven. The game story is based off the film, but the majority of the events of the game are new. Unfortunately, instead of building off the film's story, everything new makes the plot feel muddled and all over the place. Characters come and go without any real conclusions, and some of the film events have been completely cut out. You only ever see Electro twice in the game. The first is when he's a normal guy but in a completely different circumstance from the film, and the second is the fight in Times Square. Apart from that, Electro is barely referenced and you never see him again once you fight him in Times Square. Having villains come and go in a superhero video game can work, just look at the Batman Arkham games or Shattered Dimensions, but there needs to be an overall plot to tie everything together, which The Amazing Spider-Man 2 doesn't have. The final boss, which I won't spoil, only makes one appearance during the game and has no impact on the overall plot. I liked the story for the Amazing Spider-Man game as it told its own story which continued on from the film. For the Amazing Spider-Man 2 though, they tried to tell their own story as well as the film's story, and it comes across as messy. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is an open world action game. Let's start with what everyone is most concerned about when it comes to Spider-Man games, and that's the web swinging. As you play as Spider-Man, you get around Manhattan by shooting web and swinging through the air. For this game, rather than just holding a certain button to web swing, the left trigger shoots web from Spider-Man's left wrist and the right shoots web from Spider-Man's right wrist. Whenever you shoot a web, you can increase the speed Spider-Man swings at by holding the opposite trigger. The swinging is okay. While you can use both triggers to swing, I find that it doesn't really add that much to the actual gameplay. There's nothing cool that you can do by experimenting with the web swinging, and most of the time I found myself just using the right trigger instead, as using both felt a bit pointless. There are no interesting moves that you can do while swinging around the city, and swinging doesn't take any skill to do. Things aren't helped by the fact that your webs now have to attach to a nearby building for you to be able to swing. It's great that they took the time to make the webs attached to actual buildings rather than the sky, but it means that there will be plenty of times you go to swing and nothing will happen and you're full. This means that you have to stay close to the ground most of the time, as if you gain too much height, there won't be any objects for Spider-Man to swing off. The camera angle also means that there's no way to actually aim your web, you just have to press one of the triggers and hope for the best. Now, I had no problems with the web swinging in other Spider-Man games where all you had to do was hold the right trigger. It was hassle-free, so you could just enjoy swinging around without any headaches. Spider-Man's 2 swinging gave you a large amount of control, so you could swing it anywhere you wanted. However, in this game, the web swinging sets in the middle of these two attitudes. You can't do anything cool, but it also isn't simple enough to just enjoy the ride. You can also web rush by pressing RB, which will make Spider-Man automatically go to a location in front of you, but you can't always web rush, so it can't be relied on. It's not that going around the city is bad, but it doesn't take any skill to do, so it's not satisfying, and it isn't simple enough that you can just enjoy it. So The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is a bit of a letdown in this department. The controls for the combat are X to attack, Y to dodge, B to web shoot as well as finishing moves, and LB to web pull. The combat is taken from the Batman Arkham games, so you mash X to attack enemies and you have to press Y when your spider sense is triggered, as this means that you're about to get attacked. While the combat worked well for Batman, using the same system for Spider-Man doesn't feel right. At first it's nice as you don't have to memorize any combos, but not having any combos makes the combat feel limited and it eventually gets repetitive. I would say that Web of Shadows has the best combat in any Spider-Man game, and that's because you had a large range of moves, and when you played as normal suit Spider-Man, Spider-Man was very acrobatic. In The Amazing Spider-Man 2, Spider-Man's moves are acrobatic, but you're just tapping X to perform them. It creates a disconnect from the player when Spider-Man is doing all these awesome moves, but you don't actually have to do anything special to perform the moves. A new move that has been added to the game though is the Web Blast. If you hold down the B button you can charge up a Web Blast that can stun enemies. It was put in the game I would assume to add variety to the combat, but it just feels weird. Seeing Spider-Man summoning Psychic Blast from his hands is just so out of place. There are so many different applications of Spider-Man's powers that they could have picked, but why did they choose Web Blast? Overall the combat isn't terrible as it's nearly identical to the combat in the Batman Arkham games, but it just isn't a good fit for Spider-Man. The missions involve beating up enemies, swinging around the open world, using stealth to get past enemies, and playing as Peter Parker to investigate. The stealth in the game is as basic as it can get, but it works. You will sometimes be required to gain access to something that is heavily guarded, which means you have to go up behind enemies one by one and press LB to stealthily take them out. There will also be cameras and drones about that you have to web shoot to temporarily disable. You can also turn on your spider senses, which is a filter that shows you the enemy's range of vision. The web retreat that was in the first game has been removed, so if you get spotted you have to find a good hiding spot yourself or just try and fight your way out of it. The stealth does work, but there's not enough to it to make it interesting. The only thing you can do is use stealth takedowns. You don't have any gadgets and you don't have any other stealth specific moves. In some stealth sections there will be an awareness meter at the top of the screen, which fills every time you get spotted, and if it completely fills you have to restart. This meter is necessary to add any sort of challenge to the stealth, although it's not good design. When you do get spotted it's very easy to take out all the enemies that attack you, as you can easily dodge gunfire in this game. Even with the awareness meter though, the stealth is just too easy, as Spider-Man can attach to any surface, so all you have to do is put yourself in a good position and you can easily take down enemies. The stealth isn't bad here, it's just more of a missed opportunity. The Peter Parker sections involve talking to people and looking at objects. That's about it. I would complain about them, but they're usually quite short, so I never had a bad time playing them. They just feel a bit unnecessary. The Peter Parker sections are another example of Beenox trying to make The Amazing Spider-Man 2 be more like Spider-Man 2, which is odd as I don't think anyone would praise the Peter Parker sections from Spider-Man 2. There are numerous times in the game, both as Peter Parker and Spider-Man, that you'll be given several additional dialogue options when talking to someone. I don't understand why they even bothered putting these in the game. First of all, when you're deciding which option to pick, you have to watch the character you're talking to awkwardly move around. This isn't helped by the fact that the people do not look good in this game. Some of the characters do look like the actors from the film, but for some reason they turn Peter Parker into a twisted Seth MacFarlane. They also decided to completely remove Gwen Stacy from the game, even though she plays a large part of the film. It's another odd choice. I get removing Gwen Stacy because recreating the moments from the film involving her would be a bit dull in a video game, but they added Peter Parker sections which has no action at all. Anyway, the second reason that the dialogue choices weren't needed is because the universe of Spider-Man presented in this game isn't interesting. The most famous example of dialogue options in a game is Mass Effect, and they made sense in that game. You are exploring different planets across the galaxy and meeting different aliens, so it makes sense that a player would want to know more about the people you're seeing and the places you're visiting. It also helped that BioWare added a large amount of lore and history to the Mass Effect universe, so there was a lot to discover and find out. Even in Spider-Man Web of Shadows the dialogue options made more sense, as in Web of Shadows you were talking to numerous different characters from the Marvel Universe, so it was worth listening to the extra dialogue just to see how Spider-Man interacts with everyone. In The Amazing Spider-Man 2, I never wanted to check out the extra dialogue, as it never gives you a reason to care. All the complaints I've had so far stops The Amazing Spider-Man 2 from being great, but none of them completely ruin the experience for me. However, there is one problem that this game has that makes it a disappointment. The game never lets you figure out things for yourself. Button prompts will always appear on screen to tell you what button you should press in your current situation. At first they're not a problem, as you assume that they're only appearing to help the player learn the controls and to ease them into the game. The problem is that they never go away. There are enemies that you have to web blast before you can hurt them, and the button prompt on how to use the web pass appears every single time you encounter that sort of enemy. You never have to think for yourself while playing this game, you just press the correct button that appears on screen. This problem is most felt during boss fights, where the game never gives you a chance to figure out the correct way to beat them. The bosses themselves are actually pretty good, mostly involving one-on-one fights with villains, but it's hard to say they're actually fun, as there's nothing satisfying about beating them. My biggest problem with the first game was how simple it was, but even that game didn't have this problem. I don't know how they did it, but they somehow found a way to make their games even more mindless thanks to these button prompts. Let's end the review by talking about the open world. Random crimes will appear on your minimap as you swing around the city, which you can help stop. These can range from beating up street thugs to saving people from a burning building. Added to this game is the hero or menace system. Above the minimap is a meter which will increase towards the hero section as you stop random crimes, but it will decrease if you fail to stop them. This was a horrible inclusion. Instead of being able to explore the city at your own pace and really enjoy yourself, you have to make sure you stay on top of all these random crimes. There will usually be at least 5 crimes in the city at once, each having their own expiration time. What this means is that you might be doing one side mission in one part of the city, and then a crime on the opposite part will start flashing at you, but you can't physically get there in time as you're too far away, so your menace level increases. It doesn't help that after certain story missions, your menace level will dramatically increase for no reason, meaning you have to waste your time grinding crimes. Now, you don't actually have to do any of this, but there are bonuses associated with keeping your hero level up. I couldn't honestly tell you what these bonuses are, as I quickly gave up caring and didn't notice any negative effects. Even though you can ignore the crimes, the fact that the game expects you to care and will remind you about the crimes frequently completely taints the open world. This affects the side missions that you can do as well. There are races, photo investigations, hideouts, and some others. The races aren't good due to the web swinging, and you have to do the races in a certain order. The photo investigations are either way too easy or make no actual sense, and the hideouts actually aren't too bad, as they're all self-contained stealth sections. Also, about halfway through the story, flying robots start spawning in the city, which will shoot at you every time you swing past them, and they're impossible to avoid. The weak web swinging, the annoying hero or menace system, and these flying robots makes it impossible to enjoy the open world of The Amazing Spider-Man 2. If you're looking for a meaty open world to get sucked into, this is not the game for you. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is a game that is filled with poor design choices. Some of these were inspired by Spider-Man 2, and some of them are just odd. While the first game was fun but simple, the sequel is a mess that didn't know what it wanted to be. Beanox should have focused on building on what they did with the first game, rather than listening to the fans that they were never going to please anyway. Now, if I'm being fair, it's not actually horrible to play. As someone who likes the recent Spider-Man games, I didn't actually have a bad time playing it. It's more a forgettable misstep for Beanox, but if you like the Spider-Man games, I would say it's worth renting. Anyone else still wanting for Spider-Man 2, this is far from it. My score is 5.5 out of 10. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 isn't horrible, but they got too many things wrong for it to stand out as a good game.